Hello, hello. We are already a bit late, 1 minute, but yeah, we'll be starting slowly as we are waiting for a couple more people to join. And of course, we are broadcasting on YouTube, so others will be watching there now live or later. But yeah, let me start by welcoming you to this Democracy Talk, which is a monthly event. It used to be twice a month before, but it is now a monthly opportunity to discuss issues about education for democracy and related matters which touch upon the work of the Democrat Project. I am the executive director of FOX, Georgios Kostakos. FOX is one of the partners of Democrat Project, Education for Democracy, and we have our sister projects. One of them being ICID, I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. And I'll try to pronounce another more difficult name because we're very lucky and happy to have with us Karen Pamhanga with us, who will make the presentation today about the project, about her work on it. We were supposed to have also Dr. Sandra Valenius Korkalo, but she was not feeling so well, so we have the burden falls on Karen to explain the project and to answer our questions afterwards. So the idea is 10 to 15 minutes for the presentation and then up to half an hour for questions. Karen, welcome, and please present yourself and the project. Looking forward.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for this invitation. It's a real privilege to be able to contribute to the Democracy Talks, number 22, I see. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm just going to share my presentation. And just give me a second. Full screen. Is that on full screen now? Is that visible? Good, brilliant.
Yes, it is indeed.
Yeah, so as Georgia says, I'm here representing the ACE project, sending best wishes to Sandra and hopes that she gets well soon. So yes, we are a project that's funded by Horizon Europe and the UK element by UKRI under the same funding strand as the Democrat Project. So as Georgia says, we are a sister project. And yeah, it's great to be able to be here to talk a little bit about our work. So what I'm going to do in this presentation part is briefly introduce the ACE project, give an overview of democracy as becoming, introduce a couple of spotlight cases, so the Finnish and UK case. I'm going to be talking about, share some experiences of democracy as becoming through ACE, through those cases, and then end with some concluding thoughts, next steps. And then that should leave us some time, as George has said, for questions. So I'll make a start with my introduction. So the full title of our project is Transforming Education for Democracy Through Aesthetic and Embodied Learning, Responsive Pedagogies and Democracy as Becoming. Because that's quite a lot to say at one go, that's why we refer to the project as ACE. So that's what I'll talk about moving forwards. So the premise behind ACE is that much learning theory on which most education for democracy is based misses out the aesthetic and embodied nature of learning, and the ambition of this project is to remedy that. So we're doing that by creating and trialling through case studies an innovative aesthetic and embodied pedagogical framework and associated guides for practice. So we're in the process now of reporting on 19 trials that are being carried out and finalising our cross-case analyses. So we've got 6 partners in the project. You can see them listed to the right of the slide. The consortium is coordinated by the University of Lapland in Finland. So the partners have carried out 19 trials between us. And they cover different phases of education. So they go from primary, secondary, higher education, adult professional learning, and organisational learning. They use different aesthetic and embodied approaches within the trials, drawing on the expertise and experience that the partners bring. And again, you can see that to the left of the slide. And today I'm going to focus on 2 cases, one from the UK, which I led, and then I'll make some reference to the Finnish case that Sandra was involved in. but there are many other cases that we could have talked about as well. But before I start talking about those cases, I'm going to introduce the concept of democracy as becoming. So in the ACE project, we view democracy as becoming as a process that's lived through bodily experiences and emerges from new ways of seeing and from connectedness to aesthetic and embodied experience. So also it's not a finished project, it's a constant relational process of becoming towards future possibilities. Our project isn't confined to a particular discourse of democracy, but we have drawn on the description of holistic democracy that's been developed from the work of one of our project partners who's in the room at the moment, Professor Philip Woods from the UK. The 4 dimensions of holistic democracy you can see there on the slide, but I'll introduce them with very brief definitions that come from our ACE prototype framework. So the first is power sharing. So that involves inclusive participation, mutual respect, having a say, exercising autonomy. Then you've got transforming dialogue. So open exchange of views to enhance mutual understanding, seek out the greater good. Holistic learning, so growth in all capabilities, including aesthetic and embodied awareness and critical thinking. And then finally, relational well-being. And that involves feelings of belonging, connectedness to others, to nature, and that which feeds the human spirit, or within a community that values thinking for oneself. So these dimensions are visible in the ACE resources, but also other framings of democracy have shaped our thinking as the project has progressed and are being explored as part of the process. So the Finnish team, for example, and Sandra would have spoken about this if she was here, have been looking at the interconnection of human subjects with the non-human when striving for democratic values. So they've been looking at the connections between ACE and traditions of radical democracy, and also with democratic innovation, so particularly through participatory approaches. Now, these feature strongly in ACE, but I think they're also quite dominant in Democrat as well. And in the UK team, we've been working with democratic sensibility. So this is a concept in development. It's been informed by a range of literature. And this refers to a feel for democracy that includes aesthetic and embodied awareness, qualities such as empathic and ethical sensibility, an openness to listening to and newly seeing the other, and also a feeling towards the values underpinning democracy. But another key focus area of ACE, and this I'm moving to the bottom of the slide there, is the integration of the aesthetic and embodied learning into education for democracy. So engaging in aesthetic and embodied approaches to learning relates to how feelings, emotions, senses are connected to how we learn. So aesthetic and embodied learning for democracy, which I'll refer to as AELD, can support understandings of the process of learning for democracy. And in our ACE trials, partners worked with a range of different arts-based and embodied approaches to support learning for democracy. And they also use different data collection methods to kind of capture some of those experiences of transformational change. So partners used, for example, interviews, questionnaires, observations, reflections, the outputs from some of the activities that participants engaged in, and also some arts-based approaches to data collection, such as collage and gesture response. So it's creative. Georges was saying that when we first started the conversation, it was a very creative experience. In the next part, I'm going to move on to sharing some examples from the UK and the Finnish cases of how participants experience democracy as becoming and the role that AELD played in that process. So there's a brief introduction to those 2 cases, both situated within universities. So the UK case focused specifically on doctoral supervision, doctoral supervisors. They were in 3 different groups engaged in a series of facilitated sessions which they culminated in the trialling of an arts-based and embodied activity to foster reflection on democratic supervision. And there was also one self-led group as well, where the participants worked individually with the ACE resources. And then the Finnish case also involved facilitated sessions and mentoring. So that was with higher education teachers, and there were trials with higher education students carried out by participant teachers. And the focus there was on collective sense making, so through body, movement-based exercises, arts-based reflection, and the acceptive gaze. So this is a concept that the Finnish team have been working on. This is an attitude and a practice where the aim is to look at reactions, emotions, movements, and thoughts, which can be your own and others, with acceptance. So they're the two cases. And now I'm going to share some insights from those two cases. I'm going to talk about them in 3 areas, but I'm saying that there are overlaps. These areas do overlap. So I'm going to draw on the experiences from the UK and the Finnish case. So the first area relates to becoming aware. So becoming aware of the values that underpin democracy and how that relates to the practice of education. So the UK case was focused on doctoral supervision. So here the democratic values were associated with the practice of supervision. And participants reflected on things like dialogue, voice, agency, power sharing. So by way of an example, we had one collaging activity, and there was a participant who depicted themselves as they were at that point and what they hoped to become as a supervisor. And then in a subsequent session, they reflected back on that initial collage, and they noted that they were becoming what they had depicted. And engagement in ACE provided a space to think about supervision, to think about what democratic supervision entailed, and they were starting to see the process of supervision differently. So they were experiencing supervision where the student had more agency than before, and where the supervisor was no longer driving the research, so the awareness had changed. And there were other examples of challenging established practices, which created a kind of productive disruption. So Sandra shared an example from the Finnish case where it was a change of the seating arrangement within a classroom. So the students had chosen more comfortable seating, and in choosing that seating, the teacher was left without a chair. So the teacher made the decision to sit on the floor, so positioning themselves below the students. And this led to some kind of student confusion, surprise, but the arrangement reflected a kind of different hierarchy and a different way of being, different way of becoming in that classroom. And the teacher's decision challenged assumptions and modelled those kind of democratic principles of power sharing. And the UK case has examples of that kind of modelling as well. So these were commented on by the participants. So one of them said, the interesting thing is that the process of administering this is very democratic. So they continued, you follow what you try to show us, actually. So this embodying of democratic principles and values provided practical guidance and also an immersive lived experience of democracy as becoming and of AELD in action, and something that the participants seem to really value. So I'm going to move to the second area, so knowing and doing democracy differently. So in the Finnish case, teachers reflected on democracy of their learning situation within higher education. So particularly around lowering hierarchies, and they transformed their usual practices, for example, by being more vulnerable in front of their students, engaging with them on an equal footing, valuing experiences. And within the UK case, participants shared examples of how they also might practice differently. And this was often in terms of supervision, because that was the focus of that case. So thinking about how they might embody their values as a supervisor more openly, recognising and attending to power imbalances in supervision. So that could be in supervisory teams. So there's often more than one supervisor. So how do you balance the power there? And articulating why they were doing particular things. So one of our participants was engaged in a collage and gesture response activity, kind of evaluation activity. And they very much focused on the relational aspect of supervision. And when they were asked to revisit their collage, they were drawn to a heart pendant, which is one part of their creation. And they related that heart for the building of collaborative relationships and developing trust with their students, the respect for different perspectives, and learning about people's motivations to do the work. UK participants also reported benefiting really from being able to share experiences of supervision, to engage in dialogue with other supervisors, and to see things from the different perspectives. And in the Finnish case, there are also examples where students talked about where students expressed increased curiosity, interest, and respect towards other people's points of view. Some of the participants in the UK case looked beyond their practice as supervisors and thought about what they'd experienced and learnt in the project that they could bring into other parts of their professional and everyday life. And for one of the participants, this was very much about this embodiment of democracy. So they said, it's more like, when they were asked what they'd learned, it's more like enacting democracy. Being in a democratic context and being democratic is actually the point of it. And they went on to say that they felt it was their responsibility to embody democracy in the classroom and with their colleagues, and to articulate that embodiment as well, because people didn't always notice what was being done unless it was pointed out. So it's actually showing it and saying why. And then the final area is around challenges and opportunities. Of course, many of the ACED cases, and here not just Finland, not just the UK, time was described as a challenge in relation to enacting democracy. So in the UK case, talked about it a lot. Supervisors talked about the challenges of supervision in terms of workload modelling, doctoral completion times, counted hours for supervision, or the bureaucracy that's often involved, which felt like it was at odds with being able to practice democratically. One participant noted when they were thinking about equal power sharing in a supervisory meeting, this would take a lot of time. Wonderful, but could take a lot of time. Yet at the same time, the supervisors really valued the opportunities the project offered for them to engage in the AELD activities that supported this reflection and allowed them to work differently. Now, time was a feature in the Finnish case as well. And here it was in relation to establishing trust and opportunities for repetition that are often needed when you engage in aesthetic and embodied methods to gain confidence in using them. The Finnish case raised some of the challenges of engaging in AELD ideas and methods that took teachers out of their comfort zones. So some teachers reported that they'd used fewer methods than they planned to do because of hesitation, because of embarrassment, student resistance. And we had similar in the UK case as well. So some of the participants expressed their own anxiety in relation to art-based and embodied methods. So they were critical about their own artistic and creative abilities. And sometimes, not on many occasions, but sometimes they chose not to do them, or they would choose something that was they were more comfortable with. But having opportunities to try them in the sessions was really helpful in a safe environment. It offered the opportunity to experience them and for the participants to see the benefit. And this was also recognised in the Finnish case as well, where individual mentoring sessions were offered to the Finnish participant teachers, and they really benefited from those as well. And the Finnish case also talks about courage. So the need for courage to engage in AELD. These kinds of approaches can be unfamiliar, they're more exposing sometimes, and they can be uncertain, so they need to be nurtured. But I would say that the process of democracy's becoming is uncertain as well. It involves contextual personal uncertainty. And so nurturing conditions through AELD is what we've done in our project that support democracy as becoming amidst these uncertainties that are probably inevitable, can open up possibilities and opportunities for learning and growth, which hopefully I've shown in some of the examples. And I'm aware of the time, and it's just to say I've only shared a few examples, and they've been mainly from the UK and the Finnish ones, but we do have 17 other cases as well that have got examples that could be shared here. But also I think it's worth noting that they reflect kind of a snapshot of time, the time during that trial period, and there is possibility, and this comes through in the Finnish case actually, where they talk of indirect and hidden future consequences of AELD on how participants experience and feel democracy in this kind of ongoing process of transformation. It's not kind of a one-off thing. So what I've shared today, I guess, are glimpses, if you like, of the grasping of democracy. I'm going to conclude really quickly, George. I promise I won't take very long.
Thanks.
Democracy is lived through bodily experiences. It's aesthetic. It's embodied. It's not solely language-led and cognitive. It's an ongoing process of becoming. It's the sunrise on the horizon of future possibilities. That's a metaphor that's in one of our ACE videos. Democracy needs to be nurtured to flourish. It can't be left because it could, as one UK participant said, unravel. And aesthetic and embodied approaches can enhance education for democracy by opening up awareness and new ways of understanding, relating to others and participating in society. So in terms of ACE, the next steps are for us to move from the trialling phase to take these rich experiences of the 19 cases and use those to develop the ACE pedagogical framework, guides to practice and associated resources, to disseminate them, to activate use so that they do go on to support the transformation of education for democracy. So that was all I was going to say. There's some ways to keep in touch with us. There's a plug for the next ACE Democracy talk by colleagues Leah Span and Monica Pazur. So yeah, open now for reflection.
In October, we're planning ahead. Yes. Thank you very much, Karen. All right. I don't know if we should stop the sharing and to see each other a bit more. And yeah, please do that. And it should be on top of your screen, or Manan? Yeah, there it is. Great. For me, I take the advantage of chairing today, also in the absence of Diana Trevino, who was supposed to chair from our partners, and to ask the first dual question. One is the first part of it. Are you building on something that exists, or these aesthetic, let's say, embodied approaches, do they exist for teaching anything else, like sociology, I don't know, or history, or so that you bring democracy as a subject? Because for us, for Democrat, it is political science, it is pedagogy, but it's more traditional ways of doing it in a way. And you're attempting something very different, which is, for me, as a more cerebral person, exciting and scary a bit if I'm asked to express something in a more embodied way. So, and I wanted to understand also if this is a one-off, you said it's not one-off, but is it a shock therapy type of thing that registers? Or otherwise, how are you going to sustain this kind of methods? For us, we have the more standard pedagogies, and then we compare to competencies that we want people to acquire through education for democracy under the Democrat Project. For you, how do you measure this lasting effect or whatever? And I hope it's clear, and I hope it's not too complicated.
Yeah,
thanks.
Okay, thanks, Georges. I've got some colleagues from the ACE project who are in the room as well. I can see that Susan Marilena from the University of Lapland has put her camera on as well. I don't know if any of the others are happy to do that because I think Georges said it was fine. They can share in the
Yeah, of course.
So we've got Philip, who I referred
colleagues.
to as well. Yeah, and there's Joe from the UK team. Yeah. The first question is yes. I mean, there is a tradition of using arts-based and embodied methods in teaching for learning and teaching. So yes, we are building on that. I suppose the premise of the project was to use them in education for democracy, where we felt that they hadn't been so often used. So yes, we're not starting from scratch. There is a rich tradition there. So we're certainly building. I think your question about sustaining practice is interesting, because through our project, what we were doing through the trials, we'd already developed a prototype framework and guides to practice for the different phases, and the trials aimed to to see, to see how they were received, right, and how we could then go on to improve them. So ultimately, we will have the framework, guides, and associated resources that will be out there for people to use. So I think certainly for me, part of the trialing process was to see, well, what do people need? What do they need from that in order for them to sustain their practice, these practices moving forwards? And I think there is a challenge. It came through in my talk today about people and their confidence in using these. Some people are confident and they've used them before, and they might well be able to see how they can connect that to Education for Democracy. And, we might give them new ideas. But equally, some people might not have used them. And so how do you support people to get the confidence in order to do that? I don't know if my colleagues want to pick up on any of the points.
Please chip in, yes. You can raise your hand or just take the floor if we're not too unruly. We can sustain the discussion. Yes, please.
Well, I won't be unruly. I noted part of your question was about how you assess or measure the impact, and it's a good question. And just thinking about that, I think an important part of thinking about something like aesthetic and embodied learning for democracy is that I think it's dangerous to reduce it to certain measures that you assess it by, and the importance of self-reflection and awareness is built into the idea of aesthetic and learning for democracy, and it should be there, I think, when thinking about how to make some judgment about how well a session has gone, or a process over a year, if it's used at several points, bringing in the voices of the people who've been engaged in it, both educators and learners. So I think I would say we'd be wary about doing strict measures. There's a danger of reducing it to certain things. And I think we're also very conscious that learning generally is not necessarily a linear process, and certainly learning for democracy and that kind of awareness and self-awareness that's important for it it's not something that occurs in a straightforward linear process, so we can measure it off, check you've got to this point, and then we can take you to the next point. I think it's more building or growing a kind of a sense of awareness, understanding, as kind of a thoughtful flexibility and reflexivity in relation to other people. So it's more complex than simple measures.
And democracy obviously is more like civic behavior, right? And it's not just democracy going to vote or the typical aspects of it, yes? The formal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The same for us, I think we're trying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other comment on this from the other participants, or Karen again?
I don't know if I understood your comment correctly, but did you say that because I just came from a meeting with the rector with whom I talked about these methods and in what we already know in the Finnish context, that many of the schools already have very democratic practices in their schools and so on, but they don't kind of link it to democracy in a way. They have a specific courses on democracy, but not kind of an understanding that it's there in their everyday practices as well, that they could quite easily link it to democracy, but they don't do it because they don't understand it in that way. They see it as a separate issue, but it's not. I mean, I think that this is something that we are trying to do here, that we are linking it to whatever discipline or whatever, like this could be used in political sciences, in physics, in every discipline. So it's not restricted to some disciplines only. I don't know whether you were commenting on this or not, but I just wanted to say this as well.
Very helpful. I mean, for us. Oh yeah, Karen, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say I have an example actually of from the UK case that I was talking about, where one of our participants made that connection during the session. So they were reflecting on, we'd done an activity earlier on in the day where they were asked to draw, source an image that related to their understandings of democracy as becoming at that point. And later on, this participant was referring back to somebody else's image that was kind of abstract, and was saying, "Oh, yeah, that really resonated with me at that point, because I was like, democracy is such a big concept. I couldn't see what we would do with that." But going through the rest of the session and working collaboratively, they said that they come to understand that democracy, I think it's something like, trickles through everything that I do. And it was that awareness there of their everyday practices and how they could be enacted more democratically. So I think that was kind of interesting to see that. But there was the opposite as well. We had another participant who felt that they had strong values around democracy, but actually going through this process, engaging with the project, they reflected on how they then enacted them and questioned whether they maybe weren't as democratic as they thought they were. So I think it's that kind of, and then, well, I could change this, or I could change it. It was making connections with their practice, in this case of supervision. But, what does that look like? What does it mean to be a more democratic supervisor? Yeah.
Well, I think we meet with our project because we talk about schools. If the school is not democratic, certainly it does not give a good example to the students, because we deal with secondary education, with primary also. So, yeah, of course. And as becoming this expression, is it about meaning, to embody all these ideals of democracy, right, or these elements, and to act them out properly? Is that the approach that you have?
Yeah, and also that it's not finished, right? It's constantly responsive, I guess, to the environment, the situation that you're in, I guess the people that are around you as well. It's the process of becoming. It's not, it's
no
not,
end.
not unending.
And democracy should, we find out, I think, rediscover itself, because we have problems. I mean, even in Europe, which is probably the most stable, maybe, democracy these days. Good. Any other question or comment that you would like to make?
Well,
We're going to
the process of becoming.
Yes.
It's also that, yes, it's never finished, and also there isn't necessarily a settled model of democracy. It will depend in many ways on context, on the culture, the people involved, and I think it's probably wise to recognise there's a certain tension between the ideals of democracy as expressed in certain ways, whether that's the European Union or however someone sees democracy, and wanting it to be people to develop so that they can become democratically active citizens or active in everyday democracy. There's a kind of a vision that goes with that, but at the same time, the idea of democracy is becoming is saying, well, that's created by the people who are engaged in that democracy. And of course, people may have different ideas of what they understand or want democracy to be, and that they may not coalesce. So I think we should remember that, and I think for any project that is advocating a particular kind of education for democracy, we've got a view of what democracy is. So we're saying to people, we're inviting people to agree with that, but then we're also saying, of course, you have a right not to agree with that because democracy is becoming. There's an interesting tension to think about, and we try and situate ourselves as not, fixed in any particular political view of democracy, but trying to see it overarching. But then other people could certainly critique that. So yeah, well, as we often
Democracy then.
everything is really difficult, and you can talk yourself out of everything. But I think there's a real point here about it. It's something that's created by people, not something simply that can be imposed in a top-down way.
Right. I'm talking to you from Sparta, which had a different kind of democracy from Athens. And also my colleague Manansha is based in India, and that's another kind of democracy which I find quite close to the European Union because they have also the different languages and states within within India. So yeah, I mean, but what makes democracy democracy? What are the core elements that you try to enact? Is it the acceptance of the other, things like that, right? There are some principles that are eventually nurtured through this embodied method.
I mean, I made reference to the dimensions of democracy. So they relate to power sharing and transforming dialogue, holistic learning, relational well-being. We also
That is your framework. Okay.
Yeah, but we also have democratic values to be nurtured as well. So equity, freedom, responsiveness. So yes, there is there is a shaping, I guess, that we shared through the resources, the prototype resources that we developed so far.
Great. And we also use the Council of Europe skills and values, right? You use also something, a similar scheme, I suppose, or we must overlap. We'll have an opportunity to discuss this at the conference in Barcelona. I hope that you all come in November. That is the final conference of Democrat Project, and the sister projects would be invited there, and I'm looking forward to that. Great, and you said you have 19 examples, right? So there are 19 different pilot projects, we would call them, or something like that, interventions.
Yeah, we call them cases within this project. And so they cover, as I said, the different phases of education and different contexts, the different cultural contexts, different countries. And so the UK case that I shared sat within the professional learning, adult professional and organisational learning phase, because it was focused on professional learning of supervisors. The Finnish case sat within the higher education, but also, Susan can talk to this as well, but also had the professional learning element as well, because there was the working with the higher education teachers to enable them to work with their students as well. So it kind of covered both. Philip and Joe have also been involved in the UK case. That was a secondary case as well. So yeah, I mean, they do cover so quite rich. I mean, I said that they're rich examples, which I hope capture not only the different approaches that we use, but also the different contexts, so the different phase levels, but also the cultural context as well. And we've tried to think about that. I mean, that's I suppose the challenge now at the cross-case analysis phase of making sense of all of that. These are very different places that these case trials were carried out.
You're also focusing on teaching the teachers, right? Of some in some way, like we are also. I think several of our pilot projects are about teaching the teachers to eventually pass on these methods to others. Yeah, right.
Yes, Susan, I don't know if you want to talk. Do you want to talk about that in terms of the Finnish case?
I'm not a very good place because there's a lot of noise around, but yes, we organized a workshop for teachers in universities to kind of prepare them for using these methods in their courses, and then also mentored them throughout the process. And so I guess that this was a little bit different than in the UK setting.
Right, so cover a range of examples and contexts. Yes, right. Yeah.
And what we have also learned that what comes to the aesthetic and embodied methods, I think that different national contexts are very different in terms of how they can be receptive or not to this kind of methods. I think that in Finland, this is very more easy to do, and maybe in UK as well, I think, but there are some partner countries in which this is not very easy because of the democratic situations in these countries, which are very new democracies. So this has a big influence on how these these contextual issues should be taken into account very carefully, I think.
Of course, yeah. Even religious, cultural, other elements, I suppose, of outward expressions or not, yeah, must be taken into account. And I'm sure in Lapland you have to involve snow at some point in some of your, I don't know, methods. Helping each other out of snow must be a nice way of a bonded democracy. I know. Or, I know. Yeah. I'm just, yes, abusing a bit your patience, but I think really want to understand, and I think I'm understanding much better. In Greece, I suppose it would be like swimming together in the sea, but or yeah, going out late for dinner. But we are trying to also strengthen our democracy in its deepest sense, and everybody is trying from their perspective in these projects. And I'm very glad that we have the opportunities to exchange views and to enrich each other's thinking. So we'll continue. If there is any, we reached the limit of our time, but if there is any other comment or question, we have a couple of minutes left. And of course, Karen can have the last word, of course. Nobody else? So Karen, I mean, what do you expect in general, perhaps from this project, or I mean, from what attracted you to this, maybe if you want, and what you, yeah, trying to achieve.
You know, I think one of the things that I've gained from being involved myself, I mean, and I think because of the way it was managed, you know, like as a researcher on this project, you were very much immersed in the trials. It was, and you know, I was involved in the supervision case, and I am a supervisor myself, a doctoral supervisor as well. So there was that entangling, I guess, of roles. But that meant that, you know, it was also really, really insightful for me. So, you know, I could learn from all these people that I was working with, but I was also, you know, they were learning through the structure that we had provided, right? So we designed these sessions, they're working through them. But I would say, you know, the kind of co-creation element of the project enabled me to really benefit and gain from that, and to see, you know, the power of some of the approaches that we were using. And to be part of these, you know, in-depth sessions where, you know, people were really reflecting deeply about their practices and how they could change and enhance and work with them. So professionally, personally, it was really, really enriching and fascinating, interesting, exciting.
You were the professor who sat on the floor? No, you
no.
No.
But I'm sure I did some things that, you know, yeah. No, I mean, it's been great to be involved in it so far, and I'm sure that will continue to the end of the project.
Great.
And beyond, because that's it, isn't it? It's like, I think, you know, my experience is as I started, you know, it's something that's not finished, it's ongoing. And you know, certainly this project has given me the opportunity to think again about my own practice, the way I, you know, what I value, what I take into my interactions with others. So, yeah.
Thank you. The best ending. And and we are all becoming democracy and better people. And yes, thank you very much.
No, thank you so much for inviting us. And yeah, so as I say, we've got another talk lined up. I don't know what number that will be, Georgios, but yeah, in
The
October.
unaccount.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it will be in
look out
October,
for
but we'll have more.